move on to each of these behavioral categories. The first one is the disorganized expressions. Now, there's a reason why this has been given a color red. Red means stop. As soon as you, in this inventory, if you are looking after residents and you fill out the scale, and any of what you have observed gets filled on the disorganized expressions, then it basically means everything stops, guys, because it is the sensorium which is impacted here. And what that really means is you cannot even truly understand what may be happening at the subsequent levels because the task performance of this individual is toast. And and this is very important because you and I, not even I, more you guys, the DSO staff, the PRC staff, the frontline staff, you guys live in the trenches. I always say I just show up to look pretty. And honestly, the more you understand what is happening, and all of you who work frontline staff don't necessarily have in the back of your pocket that Mrs. Smith's MMSE is 12 or someone else's MMSE is 17. No, you have an intuitive relationship with these residents. You recognize what these residents are able to do on a day-to-day basis. You have that human connection, and you have the ability to develop and foster the strengths they have. I mean, the examples are, when you go for daily care of these people, you always say, you know that this person can do this, this, and this, so you want them to do this, this, and this, and the other person cannot do this, so you're not going to force it upon them, and it doesn't really matter what their mini mental state score is. It's irrelevant, because ultimately functioning for all of us in this world, cognitive testing and functioning are not even on the same page. Those are two very different constructs in dementia care. And so the bottom line is, as soon as with people that you are functioning on a daily basis, where you are seeing their core strengths and you recognize them and you see that there is a change in them, there is nothing more powerful to me when I go in and I hear one of you people saying, you know what, there's something really different about Mrs. Smith today. Because intuitively, you know what Mrs. Smith is able to do every day. Or you might say, well, Mrs. Smith is more confused off late. Now, for a lot of people, it's like saying, well, we live in the world of people who are confused. So, hello, please tell me something I don't know. But that statement of yours is worth all its weight in gold, because what you have been able to do now is pick up from this individual what is different from their baseline, because the baseline is determined by our humanistic connection to our residents. It isn't connected on the basis of their potassium levels or their MMSE scores, because frankly, most of those things are irrelevant by the time we're looking after them on a day-to-day basis. So as soon as I hear that there is something different, what it tells me is that you as a frontline staff have been able to clue in that from their normal task performance, their task performance has plummeted overnight, and it has plummeted because we understand what sensorium does in terms of the reaction time, in terms of picking the information, the chunk, the amount, your pizza bite and the size of that pizza bite, and how fast is that information traveling or how slow it is traveling, and does it even get there? So I'll share with you. So anyway, so the important thing is, as soon as you hear this, then what is the purpose for that? The purpose for that is really something as simple as you and I saying, how do I interpret this statement? My interpretation of this statement is there is increased confusion from baseline, because the baseline, whatever it is, and it's not ascertained by the MMSE scores, it's ascertained by that humanistic function connection you have and what they are able to do and not able to do. And that has changed from yesterday. So there is that increased confusion. And what is the meaning of this expression? The meaning of this expression is what the person with neurocognitive disorder in the advanced stages is saying to you is, my body physiology has changed. I want you to help me find the cause, because I cannot tell you what is going on. But if you see a change in my task performance from yesterday to today, then I need for you to know that my body physiology has changed. And I'm going to share an example with you. We were called in to see an individual in one of the long-term care homes, and exactly that was the issue. And it comes back to, here is this individual who obviously advanced stages of neurocognitive disorder, but there were certain things which you guys, for you, it's what you are in tune with every second of your shift is you set up this individual for meals. They had no difficulty putting the salad dressing in their salad. They were able to take the spoon, take it to their soup, feed themselves, able to cut knife, able to use their knife to cut their meat or anything else. Or if you took them for a shower, basically you gave them the loofah, and this individual was able to apply the soap all over the body, scrub themselves down, perineum, everything else, and would step into the shower. And this for you is a daily intuitive routine. Now this had changed, and we were called because by this time they had done $1 million workshop on delirium, because the change that they were struggling with was that this person was now taking the soup and with his hands picking up the soup and pouring it into their salad. They were using their hands to separate the meat instead of cutting it with knife and fork, and they were using the knife and fork to cut into their dessert. Or when you took them into the shower, instead of using the loofah to scrub, they would start to eat it. Now, this change obviously resulted in the family being overwhelmed and saying, what's going on? I don't know how many times this individual was worked up for a delirium, but obviously every time they did everything, they kept treating a bladder infection till cows came home. But this is how this person was from one day to the next. And as it turned out, this person had been offered a medication a couple of days before for sleeping, the trazodone. And obviously that medication caused him to have severe constipation. He became fecally loaded. As he became fecally loaded, his sensorium became slow and his task performance plummeted. The fecal loading is what changed his body physiology. And that is where I go back to saying, yes, delirium is a very important entity and we should never miss it. But the reality is we miss so much by the time we get to delirium that frankly, when delirium is screaming in our face, we don't recognize it, has been my experience. And I stand by that. But if I were to explain to you on the basis of sensorium, then this is what it is. And the key here is to understand when sensorium changes, task performance changes. When that changes, their functioning changes. And that functional change is because of a physiological change. And the person is really asking you guys, help me find that. And once you do, it is so exhilarating to see these people do so well, and the answers are always very simple. Let's talk about the misidentification expressions. And again, remember, this is the the part where the problem or the abnormalities are on the information processing pathways. So this is what we need to understand, guys, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview here. We touched upon this because somebody asked an amazing question about the memories and emotions. Is the fact is that your brain really works like a computer. You know, for all of us who understand computer, I mean, kids, my kids know what computers inside out. They'll say, Dad, go get a computer with a RAM of this, but make sure the hard drive has so many gigs on it. I have no idea what they're talking about. But the reality is the working memory in the brain is the same as the RAM, the rapid access memory in the computers. And the stored memory in the brain is the hard drive of the brain. And every second of the day, the working memories, just as you run a program, you must have a certain RAM for it to be run. And once you run the program, you can dive into the hard drive and then gather information, pluck information from there to fill into today. This is what happens in your brain every single day, a gazillion times a day, is that anytime you are responding to a stimulus, the working memories and the stored memories are always pairing with each other. And it is the pairing of the new memories with the old memories that provides a context, a database in your brain that we refer to as the inner world order or the mental images. And you've got like quadruple gazillion mental images stored in your brain for everything. And it's not, I mean, and I'm not saying this because it's a pickup line in a bar. Or where have I seen? I think I know you from somewhere before. It is because when you see a face and that face goes and starts to be scanned against all the information in the brain, and then suddenly it stops and pairs on someone that vaguely looks familiar, and I may go up to them and it turns out, no, it isn't really them, but there were similarities and familiarities in their facial expressions. So that is the whole idea of how memories work. And so in this particular, and we've talked about the memories being a part of the information processing circuits. And so this is what happens. The pairing of the old and the new information gets broken down. So it is like saying, I see you and your face, instead of not matching, because I haven't met you before, not matching with anything that is stored in my brain, suddenly connects to a picture of a friend I had 25 years ago. And then I start to look at you and say, oh my God, it's my friend who's come back. But that pairing obviously happens in advanced stages of neurocognitive disorder when some of the other mechanisms to correct it are not working. So what ends up happening is when you have the wrong pairing of information between the new and the old information, it leads to an altered sense of relatedness between the person and their environment. Because now we've had wrong pairing. And what's very important, and this goes back to what the person raised, because obviously this person was very insightful when asked the question, is all of these information that get paired wrongly have a huge emotional weightage component to it because they have been of great personal importance to us. So information that does not have emotional weightage is not the information that gets mispaired. It is only the ones which are weighted. And this is where the concept of that personhood comes in, because we all are human beings and we all have experiences, and there are certain emotional experiences and emotional memories more powerful than others. And in essence, when this particular behavioral category is surfacing, it is because of mispairing of information, and invariably it is the mispairing of the new information with the old information, which is of huge emotional importance to us. And therefore, it leads to an altered relatedness to the information that we are experiencing today. So, what does that mean? What is the purpose of this expression? When you see this expression, what is the purpose of this expression? So, when I see this, the purpose of this expression is that the presence of this behavioral category allows you to have an alternative approach to assessing for psychoses in dementia, which is advanced. Because again, you and I cannot go to a person who has MMSE of 7 and ask them a question and expect that they will have the same answer 2 hours later, or for that matter, they have the ability to distinguish if they are hearing quote unquote voices nobody else is hearing, because it requires a normal brain function to know if my experience is unique to me and not being experienced by others. So in essence, clinical interview cannot give us the information on psychoses in this patient or this resident population. But by identifying this particular behavioral category, it gives you an in. And if you look at the category, it is so broad, and I was told only to use one example this time around, because I give people examples of everything in that. And that is why sometimes I can just talk about the categories for hours on end so people truly understand. But the idea here is, so disorganized expressions is a way of you to click to say, I may not always see a delirium, but I'm seeing a sensorial change. So that gets you a million miles ahead of chasing a rainbow at the end of the, or a pot of gold at the end of rainbow that you're never going to get with delirium, because they don't always fulfill all the criteria of a delirium. And so what is the meaning of the expression? The meaning of the expression is this: the person is saying to you, please help me. My thinking and my perception is not based in reality. Okay. Now, if any of you remember the definition of psychoses, it really is that your experiences are not based in reality. So this person is now communicating to you in ways other than the quote unquote medical model of the psychoses evaluation, which is impossible. I've done this for 30 years, guys. I cannot ascertain psychoses in end stage dementia. If anybody can, I'm willing to come and sit at your feet and learn from you, because it's not something I can do. But this allows me to get into a domain which then gives me the understanding and the meaning of the expression. The purpose of the expression is an alternative approach. The meaning is the person is telling you that I have my thinking and perceptions being affected and they're not based in reality, and please help me. Let me share with you an example. And so I'm going to share with, so basically what happened was I was called in to see this patient in one of the nursing homes. And the whole issue really was that he was not allowing anybody to give him a shower or a bath. So basically what he would do, in fact, he would not even go down for meals. And all of this started to happen gradually. And so we were basically called because this guy is not allowing daily care, is not, allowing change of his continent products, is not going down for meals. And every time they tried to do that, he would get quote unquote aggressive. So we go in and obviously start to review the situation. And so basically what this guy, I tried to understand as much as whatever, gathered information about him and everything else. So what was really happening is that he kept telling all the staff, I'm not going to leave my bed. So I'm not going to walk down to the bathroom. I'm not going to walk down to, if you want to do something, you do it here and I'll be fine. And of course, they could care for him there, but they couldn't bring the food down there because the laws or the legislation in long-term care says you can't have anybody eat in their room by themselves. They have to be supervised. So anyway, he was basically adamant upon saying that he was not going to leave. And he kept telling me, do you hear the water rushing through here? Because I am drowning and I'm not going to leave this bed. As soon as I step out of this, I am going to drown and I'm not doing this. And so it took a lot for us to sort of go through the history and everything else. And in essence, what we finally came to realize is the emotional memory. So the present trigger today was that he was in a room where the facility was having a lot of difficulties with their HVAC system. And they had had lots of contractors come and go. And so they weren't able to understand why one half of the nursing home was getting too warm and the other was getting too cold. So they had basically put these ribbons on his vent. He had one of those intake vents in his room. And of course, then he had the other vents as well. And every time the air came on or the circulation came on, these little ribbons would flutter in the air and quite aggressively. And so basically what was happening is that he was taking that sound, that present day stimulus, and what was he pairing it with? He was pairing it with an emotional memory where he used to live in a part of Ontario on Grand River where it was a flooding plain, and he distinctly remembers how his house got flooded and the water came gushing in, and he lost everything in that flood because he didn't have those insurances. And even today, people don't have flood insurances specifically. That's why they tell you, make sure you have that footprint and the poor fellow lost everything. But that was an emotional memory that was stayed with him forever and on. And what ended up happening is the sound today from the flooders was basically paired with the gushing of the water when he was living in his home, and he was convinced today that there was flooding happening all around him and he was not going to leave the bed. And we could only gather this information from talking to the wife, understanding the personhood, and then of course the rest of it was very easy. We were able to, remove those flutters, and we said, listen, guys, find another room and see if you can put these gadgets somewhere else. And then slowly we started to work with him, and he was able to come around, and no longer was he concerned about being driving. So here, what was happening is the pairing of the information between old and new was leading to an altered sense of relatedness to the present day world, which was not based in reality, and we had to modify that. I'm going to actually move up because I thought there was another example, but I don't have time to give you more examples. Okay, moving on to the third set of behavioral categories. So once we've dealt with the sensorium and the information processing pathways, and whatever their problems are, obviously, if they are abnormal, it's going to lead to abnormalities of the motivational circuits. And the four behavioral categories that arise from impairment of motivational circuits are goal-directed expressions, apathy expressions, motor expressions, and importuning expressions. So let's take each of them and see what they mean. So goal-directed expressions, of course, I said it's a part of the impairment, or it's a manifestation of the impairment of motivational circuits. And that's just the same repetition. So here's what I'm going to say. In this manifestation of impairment of motivational circuits, the motivational circuits are in a hyperdrive. So basically, that thing that you see going round and round and round on the side is essentially reminding you that these motivational circuits in this resident are heightened. And because the motivational circuits are heightened, by virtue of that, there is a heightened tendency to identify that discrepancy between their inner self and their outside world. And when that happens, there are thoughts being formed, which means there are more and more of goals being represented. And when those goals are being represented, it triggers those motivational circuits to go even into higher gear, and therefore trying to meet those goals. So in essence, what happens is these individuals in your environment are so determined in doing what they want to do, and they are persistent, they are repetitive, and they are as determined as all get out. And basically what is happening is, because of that, in general, you as individuals who live in that environment recognize that there is a very high degree of unrest. In essence, we're always playing catch up. I mean, we're always running after this resident because now this person's gone from here to there, and who knows what he's up to now, you know, overturning the furniture or looking under the tables or whatever, and who knows. But the reality is, in them, the motivational circuits have gone on high drive. Therefore, that discrepancy is being detected over and over again. And that leads to more and more goals being formed in their mind. And obviously, they can't tell you what their goals are. We just see the actions. Sometimes we see what the goals are, and we'll have some examples of that. So what is the purpose of this expression? The purpose of this expression really is, what is our takeaway, your and my takeaway message? It is the presence of those busy beaver, the proverbial Canadian beaver who works hard, continuously toils and toils away until they are never tired. So when you see this happening, when you have that gut feel in you, it is because of the presence of that busy beaver state. But what is the meaning of this expression? The meaning of this expression is whatever is going on in their individual's mind, they are basically saying to you, please help me belong. We all know belongingness is a core human need. And when you see these behavioral expressions, which are busy beaver expressions, then the purpose, the meaning of that expression is that these individuals are toiling over time, working hard over time to want to belong. And where do we belong? Where do we as human beings belong? We belong to our family, we belong to our faith, we belong to our community's profession, we belong to our life's work, and we belong to our ethnicity. That's our belongingness constructs. So basically, the meaning of this expression is, please help me belong. And let me give you an example of this. Obviously, you guys see this all the time, and so do we. And there are examples like this galore is, we got called in again. The reason of referral was physical aggression. And as we got in there, we got to look at the records. There was copious amounts of documentation of this individual basically saying, I'm late for work. I need to find my keys. Where are my keys? And of course, nobody in the staff would give him his keys. So what did he do? He would start to rummage and rifle, emptying drawers, going into other residents' rooms, taking off their clothes, looking for the keys and all of that stuff, becoming increasingly confrontational, becoming increasingly upset, because what was happening in this case was he was obviously, in his way of thinking, he was late for work and he was going to go high and low, turn this world upside down, because it was very important for him to belong to his work. And of course, when we did more information, he was from the generation where you started work at age 18. It was actually a case in Hamilton. He started working at Stelco, and by age 55, he had retired. And those were the days when they would have retirement ceremonies, and everybody waited for that day of the year to get their watch of retirement. And so work meant a lot to people those days. And so belongingness to work. So his entire life was around work. And how was he presenting himself? Today was like this. And so that is goal-directed expressions. And again, I have many, many, many examples I've collected over the years. And the more examples you hear, the more this thing hits home, but hopefully it gives you a flavor. The second behavioral category in this is the apathy expressions. And so let's look at the apathy expressions. The difference here now is that in the first category, the motivational circuits were impaired, but the impairment was resulting in a very high output or very high level of output of motivational drives. But here, there is low or absent motivational drives. And because there are low or absent motivational drives, and we've talked about how you have to have preserved motivational circuits or motivational drives to be able to detect that discrepancy between within you and the outside world. So if you have no motivational drive, then there will be no detection of that discrepancy, because there isn't the energy to feel the difference. And so what happens is there is no recognition of the need. And if there's no recognition of the need, obviously there is no formation of a thought and formation of a goal. And if that's the case, nothing moves. And the kicker here is this last bullet. Not only do they have no recognition of the need, but they also have no insight into the absence of recognition of the need. And that's the double negative, guys, you have to be remembering absolutely. One is that there is no recognition of the need because there's no energy. Secondly, there is no insight into the presence or into the presence or the absence of a need recognition. So basically, it's a double negative, and therefore it becomes very difficult. And I'm sure you guys are thinking about the patients or the residents you guys work with. And the reason why it's important is that, and again, if there are no thoughts, then, okay, we'll talk about that. So anyway, what is the purpose of this expression? The purpose of this expression is, and I'm using this word not in a pejorative way, is because many are referrals. When I used to work in the community, now I don't do as much work in the community because I look after all the nursing homes, 30 of them in the city of Hamilton. that this, because when I used to work in the community, that used to be the referral question many times. Well, the guys become so lazy and they're having so much difficulty, so much caregiver this, but it's really for you to recognize the presence of inactive states. So anytime you collect information that seems to talk to you or identify for you inactive states, you need to think about apathy expressions. And what is the meaning of this expression? The meaning of this expression, and this is very, very important, is for the person telling me, I don't recognize my deficits. They don't have insight, remember? They don't have insight of not having a need. So what they're telling you is, I don't recognize my deficits. And of course, this scenario can play itself out in every nursing home where people are in this inactive state and you want to go take them. I mean, how many times do I get called in, well, this person is not allowing care for 2 weeks. But the important thing here is to remember the reason they are not allowing you to have care for 2 weeks or have a bath for 2 weeks or a change of clothes of 2 weeks is not because they are filthy, not because they are inactive or lazy or being difficult. It is because, guys, they don't even recognize there is a need here for them to change their clothes. And when you tell them to change their clothes, you are pushing your need onto them. Now, try doing that to anybody who's not demented and see what happens. And so when you see aggression, then that is the reason. And so I'll show, and of course, when the thoughts and the emotions, similarly, what ends up happening is because there isn't the motivational thing, it doesn't lead to that emotional concomitance. And the things that you often see is there's always a sense of emotional indifference, or even more so than that, there is a lack of absence of emotional remorse. So you can have, you try to help these people, they'll hit you and they'll look at you as if nothing's happened, and they have this smile on their face because it was funny to them. They don't recognize what they've done is wrong. And of course, I mean, the example here we talk about is, I remember this distinctly, we were called in to see this individual that was at home. He had not had a bath or a shower, change of clothes for over 6 weeks. And of course, the more wife got angry, the more wife got upset, the more she got burned out. It just got more and more worse. And she was starting to have difficulties. But the important thing was the husband would not show any emotional connectivity. There was that presence of emotional indifference. And the more emotional indifference he demonstrated, the worse the situation got. And of course, there was no insight that he wasn't showing any concern. And it got so bad that, it was a tough situation. And this is one of the hardest cohort of people we deal with. And you guys deal with this every single day in nursing homes, because they don't recognize they have a need, and they don't recognize that they don't show any degree of emotional connectivity to you. And in fact, if anything, they are more, that they don't even show remorse. And therefore, it becomes increasingly difficult for them to function, and they become more and more difficult to manage. And so that is the apathy expressions. And I know by now a lot of you would be wondering, I'm gonna go past this, what is the difference then between this and clinical depression or depression? Because both of them are inactive states. And the difference there, guys, is that it's the presence of insight and the absence of insight. People who have clinical depression, they have insight that they're not doing things, and they make lots of excuses. Remember, You leave them with something and you tell them to do it, and you come back and basically they haven't done anything, and they'll give you a million excuses for why they didn't do it. Similarly, there is a lot of procrastinating. There is pushing. It isn't that they don't want to do it, they keep pushing it down. And thirdly, people with clinical depression actually have a very high level of guilt in when they don't do things. So that is why, on the surface, the inactive states in both of them present the same way, but what differentiates one from the other is that lack of insight into their deficits. Because people with clinical depression do not lack the insight into their deficits. They find excuses and procrastinate and will feel guilty, will show you emotional remorse, but still not do it, or not follow through with it. So that's the difference between the two. Moving on to the next behavioral category of importuning expressions. And so basically, here what is happening is that the motivational circuits are either preserved or they are heightened. And for those reasons, the motivational drives are either normal to heightened in terms of detection of the need. And what is very important here is to appreciate that the expression of this need is very much determined by the severity of the dementia. So when the need is expressed, it can be obvious, it can be occult or hidden, or it can be innocuous. And the people that we deal with at the end stage, the expression of their need in this case is always ambiguous or innocuous, and it's never obvious. And therefore, what ends up happening is that we struggle so much. But really, and of course, the categories gives you some of the examples. But when you have importuning expressions, then what is the purpose of this expression? The purpose of this expression for you and I is that this particular individual, when they are exhibiting importuning expressions, their motivational circuits are preserved to heighten. Secondly, they are basically, for us, telling us or we're taking away that many of their basic needs are unmet. And again, the basic needs, and so the meaning of the expression is these individuals are saying to you, please help me identify my specific innate physiological need. So remember, the goal-directed expressions was to help fulfill belongingness needs. Here, the importuning expressions are help me identify my specific innate physiological needs. And what are the innate physiological needs? Obviously, hungry, thirsty, fatigue, need to rest, need for intimacy, and sexual needs. And of course, intimacy in dementia literature is very different than sexual needs. Of course, pain and discomfort, mental, social stimulation, voiding, defecating, and pleasure needs. So basically, those are the innate physiological needs. And anytime you see the importuning expressions, then your takeaway message is that there are unmet basic needs, and the person is saying, help me identify which of these primary innate physiological needs are needing to be met. And again, you can have the same importuning expression happening, which represents different innate physiological needs. And you can have importuning expressions at different times of the day, which are representing different innate physiological needs. So obviously, as you can see, the permutations and combinations of these so many variables can be quite exhaustive, but the reality is when you see these expressions, then these are based in them saying you need to identify my innate physiological needs. And of course, the example I was going to give you is we were basically caught, and if you look at the various categories in importuning, this is where it captures, the person is being manipulative, the person is attention seeking, the person is playing us, the person knows what they're doing. And so basically, we were called in to see this particular case where this individual was exhibiting a whole bunch of things, and it just seemed really ambiguous, innocuous. You couldn't talk to the person, and what was happening is, anytime in this particular nursing home, the lunch carts or the dinner carts would be rolling in, and they didn't have a built-in server in the kitchen. And so what would happen is as soon as the carts would roll in, this guy would start laying around on the floor. He would rummage through the garbage and bring it to the PSWs. He would take off the continent product, hand it over to the PSWs. And I can tell you the number of insinuations and innuendos the staff thought were happening. This individual was so labeled in such a negative connotation because they just thought as soon as the food rolls in, he's just trying to be whatever. And as it turns out, the more we got to know this person, the more we talked to the wife, the more it became obvious he was a long distance trucker, and he had a very simple routine. And his routine was he would come home and he would invariably use the toilet facilities, take a shower, and then sit down for his meals. He would never do it the other way around. As you know, in nursing homes, it's the opposite. People get fed first and then they get toileted. But this guy needed to be toileted. So everything he was doing was basically a very innocuous and an ambiguous way of communicating to us that he has an innate physiological need of moving his bowels. And until and unless he moves his bowels and has his shower and is clean, he's not going to come and eat. And it took us a long time to figure this out. And when we did, it actually did work reasonably well. But the idea was to point out to you guys is this is an invariably, because we're dealing with advanced dementias, we're always dealing with ambiguous or innocuous manifestation of the need. It's not going to be they come to you and say, I have to go pee or poo. That never happens and will never happen if you're working with advanced. So because it is so not what it is on the surface, it is very easy to label these people and have a lot of negative emotions towards them. And this happens a lot. But again, all of this, remember, you're basically making sense of what the person is doing in all of this by understanding their personhood. But what it does is each of these categories allows you to go specifically to the families and ask questions around those specific domains of this individual's life. Otherwise, you could be collecting someone's life history and be there for 365 days of the year before you get to understand the person. So each of these behavioral categories is offering you a direction to investigating that aspect of the personhood of the individual as a way of understanding the meaning. And this is how we resolve this, and it worked quite well. The final category in this are the motor expressions. And the motor expressions basically, obviously, the word we have always used forever and on is the agitation. And I honestly do not know what agitation means. And for those reasons, when you look at my behavioral scale, it has been laid out in the order of importance. And motor expressions are at the bottom of this because I don't even know what agitation is. And I don't think two people talk about the definition of agitation ever in the same way. And it really is the least helpful. And if I'm allowed to use the expression of a farmer I used to treat, agitation used as a term is more useless than tits on a bull because it means nothing. So really, by the end of the day, it is what I prefer to call it motor expressions. And I want you to understand a little bit about this. Motor expressions are governed by two things. It's governed by the frequency of motor activity. You know, your muscles, your motor, how fast your muscles are contracting, and you know the level of activity in them, and the amplitude of motor activity. And those two things will determine whether the agitation, if I want to use that word, low, medium, or high. And then, and so it can be on a continuum, but here's the kicker. It is highly contextualized to the area, the milieu in which it's happening. I've been pulled into situations where we get said the patient is so agitated, and we go in there. Yeah, the patient is agitated, but the nursing home is a little cubby hole. It's an old style nursing home. And we have seen people who are twice as agitated as that in some of the newer nursing homes, but because they have expansive hallways, So again, the idea here is the severity of the agitation, understanding here is governed by not just the physiological constructs of the frequency and the amplitude of motor activity, but also in context of the milieu in which it is happening. And that's why the more you analyze this term, the more useless it becomes. But what is interesting is that there was a direction a long time ago. It was, I think, in the late 90s, when some very wise people tried very hard to take us away from agitation as the word and wanted us to use the word wandering behaviors. And basically they said, call it what you may, or not call it what you may, see what you may, but instead of using the word agitation, call it wandering. And if that's the case, then let's try to understand the purpose and the meaning of that in terms of the wandering that you are seeing, and it applies to the agitation you are seeing. Is it appearing purposeful, or is it appearing purposeless? Because that is the key here. So in some ways, what I'm saying is, even if you still like to use the word agitation, because I know it's not going to go away, it's used all the time, then so be it. Then at least put some meaning to it, and put some sense to it, and put some framework around it, so we can all talk about the same. And the agitation we're talking about is the agitation according to Cohen-Mansfield's construct, which is you've ruled out delirium, depression, anxiety, psychoses, fecal loading, bladder retention, pain, or whatever it is, and loud, irritating music in the environment to be able to say this is agitation. And if we are all talking the same language and talking about the same thing, and even if it becomes permissible to do that, then at least we can do is now put some framework around it to say, is it purposeful or is it purposeless? Because it has very different connotations. So if sorry, repetition. Yeah, and so basically that's what I'm asking you guys to do is, if nothing else, even if you want to work with agitation, pass it on to people. Is there nothing else? Tell me, guys, is it purposeful, purposeless? So the purpose of the expression when you see the agitation, whether it's motor expressions or wandering expressions, I really don't care either way, is for us, all we're recognizing is that there is something unsettled about the situation. And the meaning of the expression is the person is also telling you guys, I don't understand my reasons for being unsettled. And they're basically turning to you to say, help me understand my reasons for being unsettled. And that is the reason why at the beginning of this, we broke it down into purposeful and purposeless. So in essence, when they are saying to you, I don't understand my reasons for being unsettled, then you and I say, okay, I get it. Let me see if I can break this down into purposeful. And if it is a purposeful agitation or a wandering behavior, then maybe what you are asking of me is that you are requiring fulfillment of belongingness needs, or you are requiring fulfillment of innate physiological needs, which are in a higher motivational gear. So the purposeful, when you identify it, then those are the meaning of the expression in terms of what needs to be fulfilled. On the other hand, if it appears purposeless, then really the meaning is the person is saying, help me understand, but they're also probably saying, I may be afraid. And or they may be saying to you that I may be worrying or thinking too much, because when that happens, then invariably the wandering or the agitation appears to be purposeless. But if you see this and you can break it down, then at least now you have more. And once you look at these meanings, it immediately takes you back to the other behavioral categories, some of which we have discussed and some of which we have not discussed yet. And therefore, all of a sudden now agitation has a meaning and a purpose, and it actually makes sense. Instead of being as useless as tits on a bull, it allows you to be able to talk about it more intelligently. We're going to go on to the next behavioral category, and that is the next set of behavioral categories which are coming from problems with the emotional regulatory circuits. And the three we talked about are vocal expressions and emotional expressions and fretful, trepidated expressions. Now, before we get into this, I want to start to talk about something very interesting, and it may or may not have ever dawned on you guys, but if you are a psychologist, then basically mood and emotions are two very, very different concepts. And these are two very different terms. And these are, as I said, two very discrete psychological constructs, and they can never be used interchangeably, because each of them have their own specific definitions. And let me now explain to you what the definitions are. Emotions. The definition of an emotion is that it invariably arises in context of a specific situation around you, in your milieu, extrinsic or can be intrinsic as well, but it's because of a specific situation, and it is experienced as a whole body phenomena. You know, it's almost like this: I'm talking to you, I'm giving you this presentation, and if I have someone, my school time friend from grade school, you know, walks in, all of a sudden, I'm going to be jumping with joy. My whole body is going to show I'm very happy, and it's going to exhibit what we call as a control precedence, i.e., it interrupts what I'm doing. It takes over what I am doing. And as a result of that, it modifies everything around me. So emotions are specific to a situation, experienced as whole body. They have control precedence, and they have a capacity to modify or change the context in which it is happening. So basically, if I start expressing emotions, whether they're happy or whatever, I am going to completely forget about you because you become secondary, my emotions become primary, and they are modifying the situation, that it's taking me away from what I'm supposed to be doing, which is giving you this workshop, but I'm all caught up in my emotions. So that's the definition of an emotion. What about the mood? The definition of mood is that an emotion has to be present and persistent for long enough period of time. So there is an element of chronicity to be able to label an emotion as mood. So when we ask our patients how our mood is, you're implicitly saying they really should remember which emotional states were they predominantly functioning in for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Now, I don't know how many of you can answer that question. I can't, because I have no idea what my emotional experiences were 5 days ago and what the prominence was. And the other thing, of course, is mood are diffuse. They're not situation specific, because moods are tied to your cognitions. Remember, we talked about cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitions or thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So when you have a persistence of an emotion, that becomes a mood, and that mood is always tied to specific underlying cognitive schema or cognitive distortions, and not to situations around us. And therefore, they lack control precedence. You know, how many people who are in low sort of depressive states, they can come and go. Nobody cares. They, in fact, come and go and nobody cares, because they don't change the environment. They don't impact the environment, and they don't modify the environment. So the important thing is presence of an emotional state predominantly for a duration of time is equal to mood, versus emotions are feelings we feel that change in context of what's happening around us all the time. And so basically, again, the repetition, and of course, it requires a subjective recall, which in turn requires preserved abilities or preserved cognitive abilities, because cognitive abilities, there should be no problem with your short-term memory for you to be able to have a preserved recollection of the predominance of your emotional experience over the last 2 weeks. Now, mind you, it's predominance. It doesn't mean that you cannot experience other emotions, because sometimes there is a literal interpretation, God forbid, that you could experience any joy or happiness because you are predominantly experiencing sadness, you know. So the issue is not that everything else gets wiped out. You are still experiencing all other emotions, but the predominant emotion you are experiencing for that length of time falls in one category, and that is, and of course, we've already talked about this, the short-term memory in severely impaired individuals in advanced dementia, you know and I know what it is. And so us asking them, oh, how is your mood? How is your mood? And those related questions, I'm going to leave it to you guys to understand the reliability and the validity of the answers you get. Because I know when I go and ask those questions to my residents, I never get the same answer. I can go back to them 10 times in a day and I get a different answer for how is your mood today? And it's because they are only talking about how they are feeling in that moment. And as they can only experience their memory in that moment, not from 2 hours ago, let alone 2 weeks ago. And so clearly, one of the things I am raising today here, maybe a game changer, is, and again, it isn't that there isn't a clinical depression in individuals with advanced neurocognitive disorders. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it is very, very hard to clinically recognize that because of the obvious deficits in their memory and subjective recall of that and every other thing. And they have to be able to tell us what they are feeling and thinking persistently. And if they are advanced, and that means their memories are shot by now, and they're living on long term memories of the ages of 15 and below, then I can certainly ask you to consider that this is something that can be, and I am challenging it, and also explains why the antidepressant utilization did not give you any benefits because you weren't diagnosing depression by using Cornell. You determined the severity when they really didn't even have, many of them, depression. And so you're giving them antidepressants when they didn't have depression, and you found it didn't work. Well, after $20 million, that shouldn't be a surprise. So here's the other part of this is emotions, on the other hand, in advanced neurocognitive disorders are absolutely preserved. And what is interesting is the experiencing of emotions of joy and pleasure are markedly diminished. Somehow, God's made us, the more demented we get, the less the chance of us being able to experience joy and pleasure. But on the other hand, what is heightened, and this is all based in psychological studies. I'm not just making this up, guys. This is all from psychologists having studied individuals in different stages of dementia. So everything I'm telling you, I didn't dream it up. I'm not that bright. This is all very much evident in the psychological literature. And what is important is that emotional expressivity of emotions of melancholy, fear, discontentment, and anger are all heightened. So all the negative emotions we don't want to feel are heightened in their manifestations, and the ones we would want to feel are not. So in essence, the plea I'm really making to you guys is, in the absence of us being absolutely sure that an individual with advanced stages of dementia can actually give you a preserved information on the relevance of their predominance of emotional experiences for a duration of time and the thoughts associating with it. We know in our individuals what we focus on all the time is emotions. And so what I'm saying is we need to work with emotions and not with the concept of mood, because the concept of mood is very difficult to prove in individuals with advanced stages of dementia. But but the emotions is what we see. And you know and I know, when we go in, we see these residents in all different emotional states all the time, you know. And again, I want to bring you guys back to saying, even if somebody, as you and I, if our moods are sad, or we say the predominant emotion over the last 2 weeks is sadness, and therefore that equates to mood being sad, it does not mean you haven't experienced other emotions. You are still allowed to experience joy and pleasure, etc., etc. And we see this in our residents. We go in the morning, you see them a certain way. Go back the evening, you see them a certain way. In the course of 2 hours, you see different expressions of emotions. So, in essence, what I'm saying is there is much more sense to us working with observed emotions rather than depending on them to subjectively tell you of the recall of persistence of emotions, which I think is pretty obvious cannot be trusted. And so that is why I work with emotions. And you and I will know if we turn a certain emotional state with our treatment into a persistence, then everybody will be talking. You can go 20 times a day to visit the same person and you'll see the same. But the normal manifestation of emotions in end stage dementia is emotions and not mood.